Is this the year Kyle Shanahan's finally going to grow? I ask because he's now lost 2 Super Bowls as a head coach. He's the only head coach in NFL history to lose two Super Bowls in which he was winning by at least 10 points. So now is this the year that he finally gets over himself and realize it's not all about him. It's about like, for example, Andy Reid, famous story, right? Janitor comes up to him, says, I've drew up this play. What do you think, Andy? What does Andy say? I love it. We're going to install it. What would happen if a janitor or a player or anyone came up to Kyle with the play? What would Kyle say to him?
Why did you send me this in open air? Like, why would you send me this in public?
I mean, he's notorious for explaining to you why your play doesn't work. Did you think about it against cover 4? Did you think about it against cover 6? Well, what if this happens? Well, what if that happens? And he tears you apart and you feel stupid afterwards. So that's the difference between
the type of person where he's like, I only take ideas on Thursdays. You know that. It's Monday. You're late.
Look, a lot of people like Kyle, but everyone agrees that Andy Reid's the best coach in the league. And I think everyone would also agree that Kyle has a much bigger ego than Andy Reid. And that's a problem. You can't have a bigger ego than the best coach in the league, especially when he's an offensive specialist like you. So do you think this is the year Kyle finally gets over himself and starts treating his players the way Andy Reid treats his players?
Man. No, I can't. Every time I think, you know what, coach, this is the time for you to, like, Grant's giving you an out. Maybe you could pivot right now. This is an awesome opportunity for you to kind of start anew, maybe build something different on YouTube. I always give up. I can't. No, I don't believe this. He is who he is, man. I've been floating this kind of scenario in my head and on a couple of shows, but walk with me, Grant, because we haven't talked about this in a pre-show. So give me the eyes if this is stupid or cut me off. I know how you like to do it. So there you go. Give me those if you don't like it. But I look at this as recipe versus diet, right? And when you are older and, you know, me and Grant, we have shared recipes. This is perfect. Me and you have shared recipes tons of times, have we not?
We certainly have.
The difference between recipe versus diet is when you are going to the grocery store, you know, I'm going to go and I'm going to get some eggs. I maybe pick up a loaf of bread, some avocados and tomatoes, maybe some arugula salad, you know, a couple of pieces of fish, and some diet soda and some water, milk, and some oatmeal. And that's shopping for your diet, because when I bring that parcel home and I lay it out in the kitchen, I can make multiple recipes, any type of food that I usually eat, because I'm shopping for my diet versus a recipe where, Grant, you know, when you're shopping for a recipe, what do you have to do? You have to be ridiculously particular. All right. You have to always mull over every last ingredient to make sure that you're getting exactly the right ingredient that you want, because you want the flavor to come out the exact same way. But it's also very expensive. It's not practical. You second guess yourself along the way. And what's even crazier is that you don't have a full kitchen if all you're doing is shopping for recipes. You just have vestiges of what you want to eat all the time, but you don't have any variety. You don't have anything that calls for the moment. I mean, if you shopped for chicken Parmesan and I come over your house at 10 o'clock in the morning and I need you to make me breakfast, you're kind of SOL. It's going to be hard for you to make that. And I feel as though that's what Kyle cannot get out of. Kyle is still shopping for a recipe. I mean, and one would even say, if you want to take that analogy a little bit further, can Kyle cook? Can you cook if all you know how to make are certain things, right? But can you cook, or can you cook to the context of your diet, to what's happening at the moment, where it's like, you know what, I don't give a fuck if it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Let's open up the fridge and we're going to be able to cook. And I just feel as though that Kyle, he doesn't want to give up his recipes. He needs to learn how to cook. He needs to learn how to create something that's going to force him to have a diet and actually go get the things that are going to be able to be that he can have to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Agile, and to be able to adapt in the biggest moments, because that's the truth of the matter is that we're going to beat over half the league. That's just where we are as a team. The truth is that the teams that we need to beat are the teams that can beat us. And They have a diet. They can do anything. So did you give me the
Well, I
look?
think what's interesting, you're talking about diet. Like, if let's stay with this. He's going to Safeway. He's got his grocery list, and there's something that he hasn't been putting on his list for a long time and is messing up his diet, man. And you could call it whatever, fiber, vegetables, whatever. It's the offensive line.
Yes.
That's what's missing. And to me, when you want to talk about growth with Kyle, it starts and ends there. And here's the way I look at Kyle. You've amassed this incredible offense. It was statistically the best offense in the league in a lot of areas last year, but it's not good in the trenches. So you always have to be deceptive, even though you have all this talent, right? And that's what Christian McCaffrey's all about. If you load up to stop the run against the Niners, you can stop the run, but they can kind of flex out and do play action and trick you and pass. And if you really want to stop the pass against the Niners, they can for sure run the ball. But when it's time to impose their will, they can't at anything because of their offensive line. And you know what? It's by design, because that's where Kyle comes into play. Don't worry, it's okay. We have a genius who can work around this bad offensive line. That's his limitation, and it's his ego. If he can finally invest in the offensive line, he won't be as necessary. And that's scary to him. But look at Sean McVay. He has one hell of an offensive line. He just invested big time in that guard, Jonah Jackson. Like, McVay gets it. No one calls him the genius that Kyle is, but he has a Super Bowl ring, and he's got one hell of a team this year too. So that to me is the growth I want to see from Kyle. And he already waited until round 3 to get an offensive lineman and didn't get an offensive tackle, all because we told him to.
Yeah. The offensive line is going to be a huge issue moving forward because they have to honor it. When you get into games where you get great teams, in order to take a team out of the game is you got to run the ball. And a lot of times you have to take yourself out of that process when it's time for you to just beat a team into submission. If you want to know who we are in our biggest moments, look at those third downs in the Super Bowl, man. Look at that. We could not control the line of scrimmage. And that's something that's going to keep coming up game after game, year after year. Let's hope that what they brought in this year is going to be able to give us an uptick. But the reason why we're able to talk about all of the players on this team, especially offensively, is because they're our offensive line. Juwan Jennings is the offensive line, right? Debo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle is the offensive line. Like, these guys, they play around the offensive line to try to engineer around it, and it works against the Steelers. It's gonna work. It's gonna work.
It'll work against Arizona.
It's gonna work against. Thank you. It's gonna work against Arizona. But when you go and see Baltimore and they knock your head off, all of a sudden we lean back on all of the weak ass teams that we feasted on to be able to run away from the reality of we saw a real team today. And they went directly for where we're weak at.
We got trounced in the trenches.
They killed our
trounced.
Yeah. So
all this talent on offense, and we scored 19 points because we couldn't block anyone except for our left tackle. He did a good job. Good job, Trent.
And in certain ways, I'm gonna sound sacrilegious, man, but in certain ways, that group of 4 is so bad. Trent gets a lot of love because of how he plays, because that line doesn't play with him. Yeah. So I'm just being honest, man. I'm not here to say that Trent isn't what he is, but his skill set falls on a really good backdrop because he doesn't play with other guys that are even nearly as good as him. It's just the truth.
I got something else I want to say about growth for Kyle. This is another thing with him. He wants it all to be about him, right? His ego is much more into it than Andy Reid. But when it's time for Kyle to put his reputation on the line on a 4th down in the 4th quarter of a Super Bowl or an NFC championship game, what's he doing? Punting, kicking a field goal. Like, he did it against the Rams a couple of years ago. He did it in the Super Bowl. He had 4th down and 4 in Chiefs territory, once once right outside the red zone, once inside the low red zone, and both times he kicked field goals. Like, man, no. You're Kyle Shanahan. You have the number 1 offense. You should be the reason you win this game. Don't ask Jake Moody and Steve Wilks to close it and then fire Steve Wilks when he doesn't. You close it. And he's like, it almost seems like he's afraid to try sometimes, which, hey, man, if you want to be Andy Reid isn't like say, hey, let's kick this field goal right here. And then Steve, I want you to take this one home for me. Like, no, he has a play for the moment and he's not afraid of it, even if he struggled all game. So that's another one for Kyle.
Well, let me ask you this. Out of all the years that you've seen Kyle as a head coach here, which is all of them, right? How many instances can you remember or go back to where you felt as though that Kyle left everything on the field, where you could tell like he doesn't care if he gets fired right here. He just wants to win.
I always feel like he's worried about getting fired. Yeah. Yeah.
That's what we see that we interpret as not lack of growth or indecisiveness, is where we say like, what are you doing? Just keep running. Why are you? Kyle is, I feel like there are moments in games where Kyle will try, Kyle will do enough to put out his game plan, but there is a moment in the game where he cuts bait mentally and emotionally, and he starts worrying about, all right, how do I close this out where I can start building in culpable deniability because we're going to lose this one, right? Like, how many games has Kyle lost literally at the last play and you kind of catch him flat-footed where it's like, yo, I don't know what to do with this one. We tried our level best. You saw me switching things up. You saw me try this at mechanism. You saw me basically leave nothing out there, leave nothing, no stone unturned. And, I don't even know what to tell you after losing. But it seems as though that every time there's a failure, Kyle seems very much like reserved and almost kind of like bracing for the punch, like he knows it's coming. And he coaches that way, where they almost seem like they don't want to be embarrassed by looking like they cared. Like they don't like once it gets to the point where they have to kind of like throw the kitchen sink, they'll stop at the kitchen sink. It's like, no, we're above that process. We're not going to look desperate to win. We're going to be the Niners the whole way, even if we lose.
I love that you compared, to bring it back to the beginning before we move on, I love that you compared Kyle Shanahan to a chef who can only make certain recipes. Like, for example, my mom could cook. I can cook certain of her recipes. Like, I'm not as good as her. I'm learning. So like, it's kind of like him, like could his dad cook? Maybe. Can Kyle cook? He can cook his dad's recipes. But like, if he had to go on vacation somewhere and they didn't have certain of the ingredients, could he make do? Could he figure it out? Or, because we see sometimes like when he doesn't have Debo in his pantry, he's like, oh shit, what do I do today? I don't have that secret ingredient that I love that I put in every freaking dish. I don't have it. And now like my stuff is mid at best. We see that with him a lot. Like a real offensive genius should be able to whip up anything.
Because you can see it from a molecular level. Like, it's kind of like, all right, I don't have this ingredient or I don't have this player, but that doesn't mean that we're completely blown out of the water from the concept. We can still find and if you look at it, Kyle shops for his team like he's looking for a recipe instead of shopping for a diet, right? A good diet is saying, when I go into the grocery store, I'm going to the produce section no matter what. I may not know what's in there that day, but I'm going there because I know we need leafy greens.
I know offensive line is the foundation of a good team.
Go! That's my point. You see what I'm saying?
And it may not necessarily fit my scheme, which is the particular recipe I'm cooking that day, but I need this in the house.
I need this in the pantry, no matter what. And
because if I don't have it, I'm extremely limited.
Thank you, bro. And that's why Kyle doesn't care about O-line. He's like the guy that's walking up to the counter with all of this stuff for a recipe, and then you look at what he eats in real life outside of the recipe, and it's nothing but Funyuns and Coke and Mountain Dew. And it's like, dude, this is what you eat for a living? It's like, you can't live off this. But it's like, I have this recipe for chicken parmesan. And it's like, yeah, but you're going to eat that one meal all the time. You don't have any water. This is all soda. Like, you need sustenance. And that's how I feel like certain teams that are built a certain way, like the Ravens or like the Chiefs, where their diet is, hey man, get the trenches before we do anything else, get the offensive line straight. So
can I just say something that's kind of blasphemous, but super true? Think about this, Niner fans. If all of a sudden the Niners had a good offensive line, they wouldn't need Kyle anymore.
They wouldn't.
They wouldn't. They'd have everything. You wouldn't need a genius coach. Just an average coach with that team wins. So that's something to think about, man. If he finally gets the offensive line, he's not as important because he's Mr. Trick You, Mr. Keep you on your toes. Like, okay, but if you just had a good right tackle, if Colton McKivitz and Jake Brendel weren't starting for your team and you had, you know, Penei Sewell and other guys you've passed on, you could pay $3 million a year for a coach. You could have freaking Jim Tom Sula. No, I'm not going to go that far, but you could have
yeah,
any average good coach and win. So that's where I'm looking at with Kyle.